Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Pursuit Podcast. I'm your host, Grayson Garvin. My guest on today's episode is former Vandy boy, Rhett Wiseman. After professional baseball, Rhett is now the founder of Wiseman Advising, a real estate advisory and consultancy business based in Nashville, Tennessee. Within the interview, be sure to catch that while Rhett was still involved in professional baseball, he was setting the stage for what is now a booming real estate business. Without further ado, let's get to it. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Pursuit Podcast. I'm your host, Grayson Garvin, and today my guest is an old friend of mine, Rhett Wiseman. So, Rhett, thanks so much for joining us today.
Grayson, happy to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Sure, man. Well, thinking back to just kind of getting prepared for this episode, thinking back to our first time that we met, I don't exactly remember when that was, but, you played baseball at Vanderbilt just after I was there, and you were a part of one national championship team. Um, definitely brought the first baseball national championship to West End, but that's how Rhett and I initially, were acquainted and have known each other. The Vanderbilt baseball community is very, very small, especially on the playing side. And so, Rhett and I have become good friends, and now obviously in the business world. So I'm excited to have him be able to tell his story today. So, Rhett, again, thanks so much for joining us.
Pleasure to be here.
Well, yeah, man, tell us a little bit more about your story and how you kind of wound up at Vanderbilt. I know that, I think probably for all of us that ended up playing for Corbs and then, you really carrying the flag of the first national championship, I'm sure that your time playing under him and going to Vanderbilt was a pretty monumental, time in your life. So tell us a little bit about your kind of recruitment story and what ultimately brought you to Vandy.
Sure. Yeah. Grayson, I started getting recruited early, freshman, sophomore year of high school, and committed to Vandy as a sophomore back in 2010. And while you were playing at Vanderbilt, and didn't know where Vanderbilt was, didn't know what conference they were in. I'm from Massachusetts, and in New England, there are not a lot of SEC schools. Actually, there's none, and there's none even close. So going to play in the Southeastern Conference, I remember.
What's that? What's the SEC?
What is it? It's all ACC up there. It's all ACC. It's different. And when I started talking to Coach Corbin during my sophomore season, the rules were a little bit different back then. You had to call them; they couldn't talk to you, and they've changed drastically over almost the last 15 years. Crazy that this was 14 years ago, but
We're old now.
we are very old. We're washed up, and I had come down to Vanderbilt and came down for a camp as soon as my sophomore year ended. And I remember walking out onto the field. I came down with my dad for the summer camp, and I saw guys who were staying here for the summer playing catch in the outfield. Grayson, you might have been one of them. And I remember seeing the big lights downtown Nashville and just saying to myself, holy cow, this is amazing. This is so far from Massachusetts, New England style baseball and even college baseball. This is on a different planet. So had a good camp. Coach Corbin offered me a scholarship right then at the camp, and the rest is history. And, you touched on being able to carry the flag for that first national championship on West End. And as you know, it was the first men's championship, national championship that Vanderbilt had. There was a women's bowling championship that they had won a couple of years earlier. But, carrying that flag and being able to be the first men's team that wins a national championship there, and especially the baseball team, it was only possible because of guys like you who had come before us and had set the foundation for what that team was. And what a lot of people don't understand is in order to build a championship team, you need to have a championship culture. And in order to build a championship culture, it takes so long, years and years and years, but it's really the work of the guys before us that put us into the position to then win in 2014. And it's the groundwork that we laid in 2014 that then leads you to success in winning another national championship in 2019. So there's so much that goes into that, we're not able to do that in 2014 if guys like you and your team hadn't gotten to the World Series in 2011 or hadn't won the SEC championships or hadn't won all the games in the SEC that you guys did years before.
It is crazy to think about because, I think that, you're talking about our teams. I think about the teams, of David Price and Pedro Alvarez and, that crew. And then there was obviously too an initial crew that Corbs had that really kind of started to put the program on a map. You get to a super regional for the first time. Obviously, that '07 team was number one overall for essentially the entire year. And then I think things really started to happen. You mentioned carrying the flag. I remember, we were a part of the first team that ended up going to Omaha, and we didn't win it in 2011, but I still remember clinching at Hawkins Field and us being in the concourse between the football and baseball stadium, and fans literally were coming up to us in tears because they were so happy because especially on the men's side, there really hadn't been a lot of material athletic success at Vanderbilt, period. And so for us to get over that threshold is, to your point again, a testament to Corbs, a testament to the championship culture that was built brick by brick. I know that that's a cliche analogy, but it really is true. And to walk into Hawkins Field now to see what the program has become, it's it's really quite humbling to even have had a ridiculously small part in that. Um, but it's pretty cool to see where it is today.
Yeah, Grayson, I remember watching that game on TV that ended up being the clinching game for you guys to go to Omaha, Aaron Westlake hitting 3 home runs. I mean, I remember sitting in my living room with my parents watching that, and what you realize 10 years removed is every year there are kids who are looking to play at Vanderbilt or play in the SEC who watch those games on TV. And they either, if they're good enough, they say to themselves, do I want to play there? Is that a place where I can see myself playing and going to school? And it's watching you guys dogpile after that game. It's the energy in the dugout after home runs and after runs scored that for a guy like me in 2012, when I'm making a decision whether I should sign professionally or go to school, that's what I'm thinking about. I'm thinking about, okay, do I want to be a part of that culture that then will reciprocate into cultures after me and create amazing times with friends and be able to win a compete for a national championship every year and grow and develop on that level, or do I want to sign professionally? And there's so much that goes into that. But those moments of watching on TV and seeing those guys that come before you has a dramatic impact on people that you don't even know it is because, if you guys aren't on TV, you're not being watched by Dansby Swanson, by Walker Bueller, by Carson Fulmer, by Brian Reynolds, by guys that helped us win that national championship. And then, 3 years later, they're there doing it. And guys below them, like Kumar Rocker, guys like Jack Leiter, are then watching them. And then all of a sudden, it's a constant flow
Yeah.
of success and of culture that then breeds championship teams.
Yeah, that's right. So a lot of people know you for obviously what you did on the field and then played professional baseball. We'll talk about that here in just a minute, but you know, extract the games and again, you being on TV, what was your time at Vanderbilt like as a as an individual? I think that it was super impactful for me. I learned a lot of things, that had nothing to do with baseball. So what was your time at Vanderbilt like? How did you feel like you grew as a man coming in as an 18-year-old and leaving as a 21-year-old?
One thing Coach Corbin does is he takes a piece of mold, a piece of clay, and molds it to something that is totally different at the end of your time at Vanderbilt than it was when you came in. And you want to talk about becoming a man in 3 years. That program was hard. It was not an easy program.
Amen.
Uh, the standards are they're over the roof. They're above the ceiling. And the standards that you are supposed to live up to on a daily basis are extremely high. So you learn I learned more in the baseball classroom every day and out on the field about life and about growing into a man than I did in any actual classroom with books or writing papers or anything like that and tests. And I think it all comes down to what is expected of you. When the bar is set so high, you're constantly reaching for that bar. You're constantly trying to improve yourself and improve the people around you to get to eventually one common goal, which is winning a national championship and winning. And in order to win a national championship, you have to win everything you do. And at Vanderbilt under Corbin, everything was a competition. Whether you were the first person at class, whether you were the first person to help clean up after your training or after your practice that day, every single thing was about competition. And when the bar is set that high and you are being graded constantly on success and you're being graded on your win percentage, you find that you're busting your butt all the time to win and be better and be better and be better. And what that does as soon as you get into the business world after you're done playing, you take so many of those same lessons and you take so much from that into the next life, into the next level of your career, and you dominate. And just like we did dominating at Vanderbilt, you can dominate in the business world. And the reason for that, Grayson, is because a lot of the things that ring true at Vanderbilt in terms of success, in terms of setting the bar high, what's expected of you, winning, all that stuff correlates to business as well. So, in terms of being able to succeed in business, I think I learned a lot of that from the foundation that I built at Vanderbilt.
It's huge. And we didn't check our answers before this, everybody, but, I say it very similarly, Rhett. It's that, I felt like the biggest thing that I learned at Vanderbilt was in freshman year specifically was really hard. I've told this story. I called my parents on the verge of tears like pretty often as a freshman, saying like, "What the heck am I doing here? I don't deserve to be here." But what ended up happening was the ridiculously high expectations that were placed on us on the field, in the classroom, in the community, that starts to become the exact expectations that you have for yourself. And when that happens, then what you're just speaking to as far as being able to win, as far as being able to crush it, whatever that ends up meaning to you post baseball, you just have a higher motor than everybody else has because of the environment that you grew up in, because of the competition, because of the accountability, because of the camaraderie. And I mean, there are a lot of people that turn down millions of dollars to end up going to Vanderbilt. And I think that that one lesson is priceless. It's priceless because I think that, again, you're better together. And I think that, again, the environment that we all essentially grew up in at Vanderbilt is a huge testament to that.
Totally agree. And Grayson, once you get a taste of winning, it's really hard to not win in a lot of other aspects of life because, like you said, I mean, the high motor, the high gas level, which is something that we talked about at Vandy, which is how much you care about something. Um, it's tough when you get a taste of what it's like to win and succeed and be better, to not bring that into other aspects of your life, and you just look at something and say, okay, well, what was the work I had to put in? What kind of preparation did I have to put in? What kind of sacrifices did I have to make to get to that level? And you can really attribute that to anything. And then you understand, okay, there's a lot of sacrifice, there's a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, there's a lot of hard work, and there's a lot of preparation that you have to put in order to get out what it is you want to get out.
That's right.
And that's something that I learned at Vanderbilt that I'll take with me for the rest of my life.
Yeah, without a doubt, without a doubt. So post Vanderbilt, you were a third round draft pick. So third round draft pick of the Washington Nationals. Give us a brief overview of what your professional baseball journey was like.
Professional baseball is every kid's dream who plays the game. And, for me, it was a lot different. It was a lot different at Vanderbilt. I loved a lot of teammates, loved a lot of coaches that I had with the Nationals. It's just different. It's not about winning, and it was really tough for me. It was a really tough adjustment going from Vanderbilt, where it's all about winning, to professional baseball, where it's all about yourself. And it's a tougher environment, I believe, to be successful in, because you're in it for you. And you lose a game at Vanderbilt and you wear it for 24 hours. You
Matters.
lose a
Yeah.
game in professional baseball, nobody cares. And
I don't even remember there were times when I called my parents after games that I hadn't played in, being a pitcher, and they'd be like, "What was the score?" I I honestly couldn't tell you.
yeah,
I couldn't
it's
tell you.
sad.
So, anyway, continue.
It's sad. It's just a sad reality. And one thing you realize too is it's harder to be individually successful when the team stinks. And when the team's really good, it's easy to have a better year because you're playing for something. Everyone's
Right.
pulling in the same direction. Every at bat means more. Every inning, every pitch, it just means more. Every play. And when you don't have that, it's really hard to motivate yourself and to motivate the guys around you when you're just showing up at the park every day, 142 times, 160 times, 180 times with spring training, and you're just playing, and nothing really matters. And it's even worse when you're on losing teams, which I've been on, where you have no shot at the playoffs. It's July, you're already out of contention, and you've got 2 months left to play, and none of your games matter.
Pretty
So it's
demoralizing.
really all about you. You're not going to make the playoffs. So what does it even matter? And it's really hard to get up for those games and compete when nobody cares.
Yeah. Yeah, so you played professional baseball in the Nats organization for 6 years, and then you've transitioned out of baseball into real estate. I wanna talk a little bit about kinda your real estate business here in just a minute. But first, I think this is an important thing to sit on here for just a second. Talk us through a little bit about what your transition out of baseball was like, because the only reason I ask is that I think for all of us that played at a high level, we're blessed to do that. There's there's a pretty substantial amount of your identity that's wrapped up in that. You were Rhett Wiseman, the baseball player, right? I was Grayson Garvin, the baseball player, the Vandy boy, the Washington Nationals prospect, all of these things. And so stepping away from baseball into something completely different, I think is it's a process that I don't think a lot of people are able to understand. So for you, what was that journey like to step away from baseball, say I'm retiring, and to walk into the real estate space? What was that process like for you?
Grayson, one thing that I never did, which I'm so thankful, is tie my self-worth or tie my identity to baseball. Because some days I was best player on the field and some days I was terrible. So if I was always riding those highs and lows, I'd be miserable to be around. One thing I've always been able to do is shut it off really quick. And, I think that helped me a ton when I was done playing baseball. And while I was playing, I always had an interest in real estate. I was building rental portfolios while I was playing. I used a lot of my signing bonus money to buy real estate. And even before then, I had been buying properties and realizing that this is something that I wanted to do. What I realized was two things. Number one, I started making more money in real estate than I was playing baseball while I was playing baseball, which, is when you're on a losing team and you're not trying to win anything and you're making more money off the field than at the field. And I started coming into the field every day and looking in the lineup and not being in there and not caring that I wasn't in there. That's
Yeah,
when I knew for me that it was probably time to hang him up.
yeah,
Um, and the transition was not hard for me, and I'm one of the select lucky few that can say that, because a lot of guys really struggle with that, and their careers get cut short. For me, during COVID, I got a taste of no baseball.
Right.
2020, no season. And for me as a 25-year-old guy in COVID, losing a season as a 25-year-old, that's devastating. That's your athletic prime, and not being able to play or showcase your abilities after being an all-star the year before in double A, that's tough. That's really tough. So, coming back after COVID, expanded minor league rosters where we had almost 40 guys on a team, getting cyclical, playing time where you're on a schedule and it doesn't have anything to do with how you're actually playing. It was tough, and it all kind of created my exit, so to speak.
Yeah.
And, I didn't go play indie ball. I didn't try and try and claw to the career, which some people do. And if you have the ability to do that and you're still hungry, you should. You should give it every single chance. But, I was just kinda done, and I had grown a pretty successful business on the side that I just put more time into, and I had a successful business on the side that I was giving no attention to. So once I had more time to give it more attention, it blew up pretty good, and I'm thankful for that.
That's great. That's great. Well, to reiterate that, you know, I would say that you are one of the select few that had been able to compartmentalize things like that. Cause I know that, you know, for me, it was at times very challenging to step away from the baseball world. And thankfully, because of what Coach Corbin coins the best real estate policy we or not real estate, sorry, the best insurance policy we could have as a Vanderbilt grad. That's fantastic, and ultimately you come around and you're able to land on your feet, and thankfully I have, but that process was hard. And so to be able to have, I wish that I would have been doing what you were doing and building something on the side to where you were really able to step away from the game that you had played since probably you were 4 and really take that energy and place it into something constructive in the business world. Um, Sky could have been the limit. So tell us a little bit more too about your business today, what you do for clients on a regular basis, and what's got you excited here in 2024.
Yeah, so Grayson, my real estate is a little different than maybe what people would expect. So I have a couple different companies. One of them is a real estate consulting company where I help people from all over the world create real estate portfolios all throughout the United States. So we focus primarily on single family homes, single family rental properties, and small multifamily up to medium sized multifamily. And that consulting company basically helps them do everything. So find the right teams, onboard the properties from A to Z. We do everything. And for some clients, we are extremely active in that process. So helping them from A to Z and doing a majority of things for them on their behalf. And then for some clients, we don't do as much. And we might just advise on what to buy, when to buy, and what to do for rehab work. I also have a construction company that specializes in turning single family units in distressed areas and areas of higher poverty that are more underserved, create very, very nice, clean, and efficient units for people who may be in a distressed situation move into. We do a ton of government subsidies. We do a ton of Section 8. We do a lot of VA housing. We do a lot of Medicare, Medicaid housing. And we help get retail investors from all over the world into those kinds of assets that are going to create guaranteed cash flow and guaranteed income paid directly by the government. So a little bit unique, a different kind of real estate. I also do developments here in Nashville. So apartment buildings from ground up construction, townhomes, single family homes from ground up construction here in Nashville as well. So we do a lot in the real estate space in different areas of it.
Yeah. Well, given the fact that it's a little bit more niche than just kind of what most people would commonly think of when they think of real estate. How did you gravitate towards that niche?
Yeah. So Grayson, years ago, years and years ago, when I was playing, one of the things that I did was I wanted to get into real estate. I wanted to have rental portfolios that could pay me while I was playing baseball. So I wanted to find a way to create passive income, but also buy an asset that was going to appreciate. And can you do it in the stock market? Sure, you can. But I couldn't touch it. I couldn't feel it. I couldn't see it. And I wanted to get into real estate because I could do all of those things. I could wake up in the morning at 8 a.m. when I was on the road playing in the middle of nowhere, North Carolina, and I could work on my real estate portfolio from 8 to 12 in the morning and then go to the field at 12:15, 12:30, and then at 9, 10 o'clock at night, go back, sleep, and do it all again. So, you know, one thing I wanted to do, and as a young guy, I didn't have a lot of money. So I can't spend 3, 4, 500,000 on a house in Nashville and rent it out. And it would blow all my capital. So I wanted to find areas that I could buy houses for cheap. And when I started doing this, I was buying houses for 10, 20,000 a piece. But then you realize, okay, if you buy a house for 10 grand or $15,000, who's going to live in that house? Who is going to live in a $15,000, $20,000 house? Well, somebody that probably doesn't have a lot of money. And if they don't have a lot of money, they can't pay a lot for rent. And if they can't pay a lot for rent, can't charge a lot for rent. So, how can you find a way to create a profitable investment on a property that is very, very cheap in an area that might not be in the highest demand? So, I started looking at government subsidized programs where people were looking for housing and the government would pay their rent every month. Then I could rent directly to the government. And that's where I found a lot of these programs. And so one thing I wanted to do now, there is this pretty significant stigma around people that do that, and it's not good. And you hear it being thrown around as a slumlord, someone who creates units for people who don't have as much, for people who are poor, for people who are on government assistance and who have subsidized rentals and leases. So I wanted to veer away from that, and I wanted to veer away from that by creating a product that was significantly different from other people. I wanted to put a product on the market that was really nice, that people could move into and take pride in, where when things go wrong, they're fixed immediately and they're fixed one time. They're not constantly breaking over and over and over again. What I realized was if you can create a high quality product to have somebody move into, they'll stay in there for a long time, which cuts down on turnover cost, which makes it a good investment. But it also gives that person the ability to live in a safe place, a place they take pride in, and hopefully ends the cycle of poverty for them and their family because it gives their children a place to grow up in
Well, home.
successful and it's safe and they don't have to worry about when they close the doors at night, someone kicking the door down and coming in. They don't have to worry about walking out of their house and getting hit with a stray bullet. Creating a product in nice parts of areas that are underserved to then change the cycle of poverty that they've been born into. And I've been doing that for a long time, and now I help other people do that as well, and it's extremely rewarding as well as profitable.
That's great. That's great. Well, again, it's cool to hear the way that you've, kind of through research found that niche. What has been to this point because, I believe that success and, if you're able to, dig into Rhett and what he does a little bit deeper, he's been very, very successful. I believe that success is rarely a linear progression. So,
Yeah.
what have been some of the difficulties for you as you've built this business or these businesses to where they are today?
Yeah, Grayson, honestly, the that is something I think about all the time. And I always come back to the same two conclusions. Number one, I fail all the time. I make mistakes every single week and I learn from them. And I'm not afraid to make mistakes. That's
Mm.
number one. I fail more than anybody, but it's because I put myself in positions where I can fail. Um, and I fail and I learn from it, and that's it. I make corrections and I don't fail again in that at that same thing. So failure is number one. And that's something that I got directly from baseball. I mean, you fail more times than you succeed in baseball. You keep dusting yourself off and getting back in the box or getting back on the mound. And that's something that has translated incredibly into business for me. But the second thing is I take a lot of risk and I love to play poker. I love to gamble. And for me in business, that has paid off. And when you're sitting at the poker table, you are constantly quantifying calculated risk. And in business, if you're a good business person, you're doing the same. And that's something you do every single day, Grayson, in finance and investing. It's something I do every day. I say, okay, if I do this, here are my possible consequences and here are my possible achievements. If I do something like this, if I take the risk. And if the risk is worth the reward with the downside that I'm willing to accept, I do it. And if it doesn't pay off, it doesn't pay off. And I do things all the time where I fail and I take a gamble and I lose. And then I do things right that I gamble on and I win. And I make sure that with the calculated risk I take, I win more than I lose. And the payoffs are always more than the downside. So I take a lot of risk, Grayson. I'm not afraid to lose and I'm not afraid to fail. And those are the two biggest things that have allowed me to get to where I am today.
No, I'd say that that's gold and, and something that I've talked about in previous episodes of the podcast. If you talk to anybody that's had really material success, they always talk about this willingness to fail, and that failure is actually just not getting back up off the mat, right? It's like, to your point, it's like you make mistakes all the time. I make mistakes all the time. And but real failure is just, okay, I quit. I'm not doing it again. We're not going to go into, iteration C, D, or E. We're just not going to do it anymore. That's really the only thing that is true failure. And then going back to your point about risk, I was talking to somebody about this morning. I think that, to your point, risk is required to be successful. And I think also internally, people don't do a great job quantifying risk, where I think people oftentimes think that whatever risk is to them is that it's going to be worse or it's going to be more difficult than it actually ends up being. And so if you have the ability, or if you have a team or a person around you that's going to help you quantify that, you're going to be able to take the appropriate risk for whatever you're endeavoring towards. And if you've quantified it appropriately, you're going to be able to have success more times than not, and maybe not lose your shirt if it ends up, not going your way. But I think that that's really insightful. That, again, if you want to be successful, there's going to be a level of risk that you have to take, and you have to have the stomach for that.
Yeah, totally agree.
Yeah, and I think too, the other piece of being successful that's required is you have to have the stomach for the messy middle and the level of ambiguity that can exist in that interim time where, okay, I've taken the risk, but I haven't seen the payoff yet. Like, am I okay, or am I going to be okay to continue on until you either see a payoff or you see a failure there, and then you continue on. And I think that's another piece that a lot of people really aren't willing to willing to do, is they're not willing to have that level of ambiguity. And that's another, in my opinion, massive piece of entrepreneurship. That's a massive piece of risk. And that's ultimately a massive piece of being successful. It's like you have to take the risk, then you have to be willing to continue doing the work, continue endeavoring until you see a payoff.
Yep, totally agree.
Yeah. So as you sit here now, again, having built, a really nice couple of real estate businesses, consultancy, how do you how do you define success for yourself? Because it sounds like, again, you obviously want to continue developing. I'm sure that you have some monetary, barometers that you're trying to hit. There's also, you talked about it being very rewarding. So how, sitting here in 2024, how does Rhett Wiseman define success for himself?
You know, at the end of the day, Grayson, it's not a number. It's not a profit. It's not a number of clients. It's just the ability to continue to create a product that people are happy with and that helps a lot of people. And in 2023, we did close to 40 million in home acquisitions. We housed a little over 300 people in underserved communities across the country. Um, if I could repeat those numbers every year, I'd be thrilled. I'd be absolutely thrilled. Being able to create homes for people and then seeing distressed property that is the eyesore of the neighborhood, that drags everyone else's property values down, and watching that turn into the spectacle of the neighborhood on a positive side,
Yeah.
and then seeing someone move in there with their families, uh, and have a fresh start at life where they're moving out of a housing project, riddled with violence, where they're moving into a home because they didn't have a home or they were in a shelter, and seeing them move into one of our products, taking pride in that, and then excelling is success enough for me, and being able to replicate that hundreds and hundreds and thousands of times is what I love, and what I get the most out of. And yes, it's a business, and there is a profit that goes into that, but the feeling of making money is nothing compared to knowing that everybody is winning and investors are getting a property that is in fantastic shape and helping out a tenant, and then the person moving into that unit is then super prideful and happy, to then better their own lives as well. So everybody wins, and I just want to keep replicating that model, um, so that when I'm done doing this, I can look back and say, hey, we helped 10,000 families, or we
Yeah.
housed 25,000 families. And I'll be able to hang my hat on that.
That's great. Well, it ends up, what you're talking about is kind of it's a process versus a results orientation, right? And it's like we were kind of, I mean, we were programmed, again, Coach Corbin now, he didn't when I was there. And I don't know if this happened when you were there, but he famously now calls practice training. It's training. We're dealing with the process, right? And that's exactly what you're speaking to. And what ironically happens is that when you are anal about the process, the results take care of themselves.
Yeah.
And it's a beautiful thing that and it's kind of weird because oftentimes you would think that it's like, oh, if I want to, I'm just throwing out a number. If I want to make $1 million, like I need to be laser focused on the $1 million. Well, no, that's not true. It's like, what are the processes that you need to have in place? What are the daily tasks that you need to endeavor towards that are going to potentially create the ability for you to have $1 million? But if all you can think about is the $1 million, you're never going to get there. And so you're speaking to that. And I think that's too just something that is important for listeners to hear too. That yeah, you can have ultimate goals, but you have to also have a very intricate process orientation to make sure that, ultimately things are going to be successful.
No question.
So I love to ask this question too. And, again, you're a little bit younger than me. So most people would say that you're pretty young in general. But what's one thing that you wish that 22-year-old Rhett knew that you know now that would have saved you a lot of headache and heartache, kind of getting you from there to where you are now?
Grayson, I get asked that often. And when I first started getting asked that question, I would say, Rhett, don't do this, or don't do this because this is going to happen. But as I get older, I realize that every mistake I've made is a creation of where I am now. And, I about 2 years ago, whenever I'd get that question, I started to stop answering it in the way that I did when I was younger. And now my answer to that question is I do nothing. All the failures, all the mistakes, all the errors in judgment, and the things that I did where I could have gotten to this point a lot earlier, I wouldn't have avoided. I
Yeah.
would do it all the exact same. And the reason is it put me where I am today with the knowledge I have today.
Yeah.
And everything that I do gets me back to this point. And where I am right now, I love. And it is just I am a creation of my failures and my mistakes. So if I could go back to my 22-year-old self, I'd say, "Hey, buddy, just enjoy the ride
Yeah.
and go for it, and just
Yeah.
keep doing everything you're doing."
Yeah. Easier said than done, but, I think that's spot on. So as we wrap up here, this is not a financial podcast, but everyone listening as well as Rhett knows that I am a finance guy, so I like to throw in a little bit of finance as we finish up. Um, Thinking back to your younger years, do you remember the first thing that you saved for?
I think it was a bicycle.
Bicycle.
I think it was a bicycle. Yeah, there was a craze on my in my neighborhood on my street where everyone had these cool bikes and they had the pegs on the bikes and they had these cool tire air caps that they had on the bikes. And
Yeah.
I remember saving up. I think I bought the first bike for maybe $20 at a yard sale. Uh, and I think it took me probably 3 months to save that $20. I couldn't tell you what I did for the 20, but
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure it took me about 3 months to save it and then go to that yard sale and buy the bike, and I remember spray painting it gold and putting pegs on the front and the back and, made it look good, and then I remember taking it out of the off the driveway and realizing it was a complete piece of junk. It looked good, but it was a piece of crap, and it could
Yeah.
barely drive. I remember driving it and the chain falling off and me turning the wheel to the left and the thing going to the right. It was a disaster, but, I think that was the first thing I ever saved for.
That's funny. That's awesome. Yeah, I can't remember. I think mine was probably either a baseball glove or shoes.
Yeah.
Was a big shoe guy growing up, so I'm sure there was something in there for me. So, well, Rhett, thanks so much for your time today. We really appreciate your wisdom, and I think that there's so many, again, your story is so interesting, but there's also so much wisdom to glean from the words that you spoke today. So, thanks so much for spending time with us.
My pleasure, guys. Thanks for having me on.